Starting our year in review for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, that and more on today's episode of Locked On Bucs.
You are Locked On Buccaneers, your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, and welcome into this episode of Locked On Bucs, your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank you for making Locked On Bucs your first listen review every day. Don't forget you can subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, you can follow along on Twitter. I am James Yarcho at JYarcho_Bucs, credentialed member of the media covering your Tampa Bay Buccaneers, here with you every Monday through Friday, along with the everydayers. And for that, I want to share my appreciation for your continued support of the show. One of the ways you can support the show is become a Locked On Bucs insider. You're going to get news, rumors, updates, general thoughts, one-on-one conversations with me via text message. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs or click the link in the show notes to become an insider today. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you're going to get started with $250 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Going through how this team stacked up against recent Buccaneers teams, and I'm going to be going through the offense in this episode before we talk about the defense. We're going to hand out some end-of-the-season awards or criticisms, however you want to view it. But let's start by talking about the offense. The Buccaneers finished the season as the only playoff team in the top 5 in the NFL in both passing and rushing offenses. They were third in the NFL in total offense with 399.5 yards per game, third in the NFL in passing offense with 250.4 yards per game, fourth in the NFL in rushing with 149.2 yards per game, and fourth in the NFL in scoring offense at 29.5 points per game. That starts with Baker Mayfield and his play this season. Third in the NFL in passing yards at 4,500, second in passing touchdowns of 41, third in the NFL in completion percentage with a minimum of 300 pass attempts at 71.4%, and seventh in passer rating at 106.8. After just 2 seasons, Baker is ninth in franchise history in passing yards. He's seventh in passing touchdowns with 69, which is also the most of any quarterback in the NFL over the last 2 seasons. And he has the highest completion percentage of any quarterback in team history. He has the highest passer rating for a single season in team history at 100.7. That passes Brady's 98.1. His 41 touchdowns are the second most in the season in team history. And then his 71.4% completion percentage is the highest single season mark in franchise history. Beyond that, the Bucs' 502 points scored are second only to the 2021 Buccaneers team that scored 511, and the 2024 Bucs point differential of plus 117 is the 5th best mark in franchise history. 2021, they were at plus 158. Then they were at plus 150 in 2002. In 2020, they were at plus 137. And then way back in 2000, they were at plus 119. Though many of those point differentials were due to the defense giving up so few points. For instance, the 2002 team gave up less than 200 points all season long, while the 2000 team gave up just 269. We're going to talk more about the defense tomorrow, but this team allowed the 13th most points in team history, and they are the only team in the top 20 in points allowed to make the playoffs, let alone win the division. For all the criticisms that Baker Mayfield gets, he was outstanding this season. Back-to-back career years for Baker Mayfield. He increased his career high in touchdown passes by 13, his yards by 456, his completion percentage by 7.1, his success rate, which, I talked a lot about Bucky Irving's success rate throughout the season. For a quarterback, it's pretty much the same thing. 40% of yards needed on first down, 60% on second down, 100% on third or fourth down. But his success rate was a career high of 53.9%. That tops his previous career high of 49.4 back in 2020. Unfortunately, he also went up by 6 in interceptions compared to last season. Wasn't his career high. That was 21 back in 2019, but it's the second most that he's had in a season. He was also sacked 40 times for the second straight year. Part of that's on him and his propensity to try to extend plays, to try to buy time, to try to wait for somebody to get open. Part of it's on the offensive line, but Baker certainly needs to figure out a way to take far fewer hits. Despite all of these improvements, Baker Mayfield was not selected to the Pro Bowl or selected as an All-Pro like he was last season, and yet he managed to put up all of these career highs without Mike Evans for a month and without Chris Godwin for the final 11 games, including the playoffs. There were games where his number one receiver was Sterling Shepard, yet he still managed to have 6 touchdowns and just 2 interceptions without his top 2 pass catchers on the field with him. Yes, those were 3 straight losses, all by 1 score. So you have to wonder how those games would have been different had those 2 been on the field. How different would the playoff game have been with Chris Godwin out there? How much more impressive would Baker's numbers have been if he had his full allotment of weapons all year long? I'd like to think that in Kansas City, they go for 2 if you have Chris or Mike on the field. I think in Atlanta or against Atlanta, that second time in the throwback game, the Bucs probably win that if Mike or Chris are on the field. Against San Francisco, same thing. With Mike or Chris on the field, I think they win that game. You can look to the playoff game. If you have Chris Godwin out there, Baker went 15 of 18 in that game. You have Chris Godwin out there, I'm guessing some of those drives last a little bit longer. Some of those third downs are converted into first downs, and the Bucs probably come away with a win. So, overall, I know people were getting on my case on the live show about Baker, and there are some that still don't buy into it. Look, Baker, back-to-back seasons, he's had career years, and there's something to be said about that. And he did it with 2 different offensive coordinators. So, Liam Cohen interviewed with the Jaguars for their head coaching vacancy on Wednesday. We'll see if he's going to have to do it again without, Liam Cohen next year and to have his 3rd different offensive coordinator in as many years. But, I talked to Evan on yesterday's show about that. He said he believes that Liam Cohen is going to be a head coach next season. And, if it's not with the Jags, it'll be with the Bucs. But, that's a difficult situation to navigate where you have a offensive coordinator that was able to do so many great things, even without Chris Godwin for most of the season, even without Mike Evans for a month, even with, having to integrate these different rookies and you have offensive linemen in and out of the lineup. You lose your starting tight end. He still managed to call some incredible games and have one of the best offenses in the NFL. So it'll be interesting to see how all of that plays out. But one weapon that Baker Mayfield did have was a rookie running back that revitalized the Buccaneers rushing attack. We're going to talk about that next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same-game parlays, and so much more. They have so many ways for you to pick up a W. I love betting on which players are going to score a touchdown and how many points each team will score. But you can do player props for yards, receptions, touchdowns. More than that, you can place bets on team points for a game, a half, or even a quarter. The Lions are the favorites to win the Super Bowl at plus 290, followed by the Kansas City Chiefs at plus 350, and then the Philadelphia Eagles at plus 420. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today, and you're going to get started with $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Thank you again for making Locked On Bucs your first listen review every single day. The new Locked On NFL is here, and it's 2 shows every day. You got the Madman Tyler Rowland kicking off your morning, and then you can stop by the barbershop with Tony Wiggins for some real NFL talk. You add in the Locked On local experts, and you get unprecedented NFL insight, hot opinions, detailed breakdowns, all in 30 minutes. It's the new Locked On NFL, and it's twice a day, so make it your second listen at the new Locked On NFL on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Bucky Irving changed everything for the Buccaneers this season. And look, I like Rashad. I still think he adds a lot of value to the Buccaneers offense, but Bucky Irving took the run game to another level. If you take out the game against the Las Vegas Raiders when Bucky left early with an injury, he had 8 straight games averaging over 4 yards per carry. You'd have to go all the way back to the loss in Kansas City to find the last time that he struggled in the run game. He had just 7 carries for 24 yards at 3.4 yards per carry. And I've talked about it numerous times. He was the first Bucs player to rush for 1,000 yards since 2015. He was the first rookie to do it since 2012. He was just the 13th running back in team history to rush for over 1,000 yards. He's got the 10th most rushing yards in a single season in Bucs history with 1,122. He's one of only 2 Bucs running backs in franchise history to rush for over 1,000 yards while averaging 5 or more yards per carry. He joins LeGarrette Blount, who did it way back in 2010. The only other Buccaneers running back to average 5 or more yards per carry was Ronald Jones in 2020. He came up 22 yards short of that 1,000-yard mark. Bucky's 5.4 yards per carry were also the most by any Buck running back in a season ever with a minimum of 100 carries. Then his 8 touchdowns were the most among all rookies this season. His 55.1% success rate was 7th among running backs and 2nd among all rookies, trailing Jaden Daniels. His 881 yards after contact was 7th in the NFL. His 3.93 yards after contact per rush was the best in the NFL with a minimum of 100 carries. This is a franchise-changing player. Like, truly, this is the kind of player that elevates everyone. He makes the run game look better. He makes the offensive line look better. He makes the passing game better just by the sheer threat of his presence on the field. Take a second to think back at the Buccaneers rushing attack over the last 10 years. I'm going to tell you where the Bucs ranked in the NFL in rushing offense since 2015. So here we go. Starting with 2015 and working our way up to this past season in 2024. The Bucs rank in the NFL in rushing 5th, 24th, 27th, 29th, 24th, 29th, 26th, 32nd, 32nd, 4th. So after 8 years of being in the bottom 25% of the league in rushing, they're back in the top 5. And you can point the finger squarely at number 7 and say, he's the reason why. You had improvements along the offensive line with the additions of Bredesen and Barton. Absolutely. You have offensive coordinator Liam Cohen. He plays a big part in it. But Bucky Irving, being the kind of running back that he is what elevated this run game to the level that it was. Rashad White was decent, but he certainly didn't have the season that many of us, myself included, thought that he would. I was very vocal in my prediction that Rashad was going to improve on his 990-yard performance of 2023, but instead the spotlight was taken over by Bucky. I mean, and that's not a slight at Rashad. It was just that Bucky was that much better. You know, Rashad had just 613 rushing yards on the season, but he averaged 4.3 a carry. That's a career high for him. But he also had just 3 rushing touchdowns. Now, he also added 393 yards and 6 touchdowns in the passing game, so he actually had more total touchdowns than Bucky Irving did. But this wasn't the season that we thought that Rashad was going to have. But that doesn't mean that he wasn't a solid contributor to the team. He had 35 rushes and 18 receptions that resulted in a first down this season. his rushing success rate was still a 50.7%. But we saw his opportunities plummet late in the season. 3 touches in the playoff game against Washington, no touches the week before against the New Orleans Saints, just 7 touches against the Panthers, 10 against the Cowboys. It was a rapid decline for Rashad White down the stretch at the end of the season because Bucky Irving was getting more and more opportunities, and he was getting hotter and hotter and becoming more effective throughout that final month to 5 weeks. But this is a 1-2 punch that I think is going to be a big part of what the Bucs are able to do next season at the very least. After that, I'm not so sure that Rashad sticks around in such a limited role, but you sprinkle in a little bit of Sean Tucker, who also had career highs across the board because he actually had some viable opportunities throughout the season. He was NFC Offensive Player of the Week when they beat the Saints in New Orleans. He had a couple of goal line opportunities. He got in the end zone a few times. So you can even say this 3-headed monster is going to play a big role in who the Buccaneers are and how they establish their run game moving forward. Another big part of that is going to be what Evan and I talked about on yesterday's episode, what I also talked about on the live show after the wild card loss to Washington. Do they bring back Ben Bredeson? And I think that they should. Ben Bredeson had a really solid season. And Evan pointed out he's probably the weakest link on the offensive line. But if your weakest link played as well overall as Bredeson did throughout the season, that's a weak link that you can live with. You'd have to believe that Barton improves on his rookie performance and gets even better. I still believe that the Bucs have a perennial all-pro at center, in Graham Barton as his career continues. So all of that plays in to how effective this rushing attack was and how they managed to go from 32nd in the NFL to 4th in a span of 1 year. It was the additions of Liam Cohen, Bucky Irving, Graham Barton, and Ben Bredeson. So you want to build on that. You want to continue to thrive in that area because that's what helped create a 4,500 yard and 41 touchdown performance out of Baker Mayfield. But, I'm not sure at this stage, and we'll talk more about it as we progress into the offseason. I'm not sure Rashad White wants to be second fiddle. And I know both Bucky and Rashad were saying the right things throughout the season. Individual success is group success. And Bucky had said, his success is also Rashad's and that they're doing it together. It doesn't matter who gets the carries because they're a team and yada, yada, yada. But at some point, Rashad White is going to say, look, I was almost 1,000-yard back. Why am I only getting to touch the ball 3 or 4 times a game? I want to go somewhere where they use me, where they appreciate me, where they want to have me actually carrying the ball. And the loss, if the Bucs lose Rashad, that's going to hurt them in pass protection. Bucky got bowled over a couple of times trying to pick up blitzes for Baker Mayfield. I don't know. Maybe the Bucs say, you know what? We can get Sean Tucker out there. He's got some beef to him. He can pick up those blitzes and be our third down back because Bucky just isn't cutting it. But when you take a look at the grand scheme and you say, look, Bucky's the RB1. He's the guy that's going to tote the rock way more than anyone else. You have Sean Tucker there who can come in and be that bruiser, can be that 4th and 1 guy, that goal line guy. Maybe if there's a team that shows some interest, we can move on from Rashad and either gain some extra draft capital or you go back to yesterday's episode with Evan and him talking about his bold prediction that the Bucs are going to trade for a Max Crosby or a Trey Hendrickson or some type of elite edge rusher. Maybe there's a team that calls them that says, hey, we need a running back pretty bad. We know you need an edge rusher. Both of these guys are in contract years. We're not going to be able to pay Max Crosby. You guys have Bucky Irving. How about you give us Rashad and a 4th, and we're going to give you Max Crosby? If I'm the Bucs, I'd take that deal. If it's Rashad and a 3rd, I think I'm taking that deal because what an elite edge rusher would add to this team versus what you're getting from Rashad, you're going to be better off with the elite edge rusher. And again, I like Rashad. I want him to be part of this team next year, but that's a possibility. That's a situation the Bucks and Jason Light could find themselves in. And there's going to be plenty of teams realizing with the emergence of Bucky Irving, with the play of Derrick Henry and Saquon Barkley and Bijan Robinson, like, you still need a top running back in this league if you're going to have success. And, if Rashad's able to go out to Vegas and get 20 to 25 touches a game, that's going to help their offense in a big, big way. Whereas in Tampa, he might get 5 or 7 touches a game. That's a big difference. And it's probably a situation that Rashad would be a little bit happier with. But we'll talk more about those situations down the stretch. There are quite a few pass catchers that deserve some praise. That is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs. Growing your small business in 2025 comes down to how well you can hire. And let's face it, better hires start with smarter insights. That's where LinkedIn comes in. With the strongest hiring data available, LinkedIn helps you identify the right candidates, giving you the confidence to make the best decisions for your business. I've used LinkedIn Jobs myself, and I can tell you it's a game changer when it comes to hiring the right fit. Small businesses are wearing lots of hats, so every hire is crucial. LinkedIn understands that. That's why they connect you with the best candidates using data that you won't find anywhere else. From unique skills and interest to the connections you share, LinkedIn helps you find the right person for the job. In fact, 72% of small businesses say that LinkedIn has helped them find high-quality candidates. Hire smarter this year and find your next great hire on LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Wrapping things up here on a Wednesday edition of the Locked On Bucs podcast and talking about the offense. Let's put a tidy little bow on this and let's talk about some of these pass catchers because, of course, Mike Evans was Mike Evans. He got his 1,000 yards. He absolutely abused Marshawn Lattimore in the wild card round to the point that Lattimore was crying on the sidelines. That's not being facetious. That was the cameras zoomed in on Lattimore on the sideline, whose eyes were welling with tears because Mike Evans took him behind the woodshed. And he finished with 11 touchdowns on the season. That's the 4th most in a single season in his career. He also had a 62.7% success rate. That's a career high. A 67.3% catch rate. That's a career high. There's not much else to say about the team's all-time greatest player and all-time greatest offensive weapon. He's now 24th all-time in receiving yards, just 700 away from passing Torrey Holt for 17th all-time. He's 1,100 from passing Julio Jones for 16th all-time, and he's 1,400 away from jumping up to 12th all-time ahead of James Lofton, just behind Andre Johnson. He's also 9th all-time in touchdown receptions, 6 away from tying Tony Gonzalez, 11 behind Antonio Gates, and 16 behind the great Larry Fitzgerald. A season that started off so promising for Chris Godwin ended obviously in disaster. He finished with 576 yards and 5 touchdowns on 50 receptions in just 7 games. His 72.6% success rate was by far a career best, and his 33 receptions for a first down meant that he averaged a first down every 0.67 receptions. He was top 3 in the NFL in receptions, yards after catch, and first downs, while being top 5 in touchdowns when he went down. And I will die on the hill that if he stayed healthy, he would have prevented Jamar Chase from getting the Triple Crown. There is no doubt in my mind that that was the kind of year that Chris Godwin was having. Let's expand Godwin's season out to a 17-game season. He was on pace for 129 receptions. That would have been a career high. 1,481 yards. That would have been a career high. 13 touchdowns. That would have been a career high because Chris Godwin has never had a double-digit touchdown season. 84 receptions for a first down. That would have been a career high. And 903 yards after catch, which, surprise, surprise, would have been a career high. What Chris Godwin was doing this season was next level. And as I mentioned earlier in the show, I firmly believe that with Chris Godwin on the field, the Bucs beat Atlanta in Tampa. They beat Kansas City in Kansas City. They beat Dallas on Sunday Night Football, and they beat Washington in the wild card round and are on their way to Philly for the divisional round. He would have changed a lot about what the Bucs offense was able to do, and it really sucked that he went down the way that he did. Now, you just have to hope that they bring him back next season to build off of what he started with Baker and Liam. And I was just on Twitter before recording this episode. My buddy JC Cornell had tweeted out, would you like to see the Bucs bring back Chris Godwin at $20 million plus a year, or let him walk and draft a wide receiver? And you bring back Chris Godwin. Evan talked about it on yesterday's show as well. You bring him back. You are not going to find a guy in the draft, especially at a spot where you would be drafting a wide receiver, which is at the earliest day 2. You are not going to find someone to walk in as a rookie and do what Chris Godwin does. You are not going to find a player that contributes the way that he does on the field, at least not right away. And you're certainly not going to find the type of leader that he is in the locker room. It sucks that he went down. It sucks that he got that injury, but we're not talking about a guy like Jamel Dean, like Carlton Davis, like T. Higgins, who's going to probably get more money than Chris Godwin as a free agent, which is ludicrous. Christian McCaffrey, those guys are injury prone. Those guys, they missed multiple games every single year. I think there's been 2 seasons where McCaffrey hasn't missed games. So this isn't a guy that has constant nagging, recurring injuries. It's a guy that suffered a catastrophic knee injury and a catastrophic leg injury. But the leg injury that he suffered this year, the dislocated ankle and the broken, I believe it was a broken tibia, that doesn't affect his already surgically repaired knee. Evan did a great job of pointing that out on yesterday's episode. His injury this year didn't affect the ligaments that already had to be repaired a couple of years ago. So when Chris Godwin comes back, he is back. He's all the way back. This isn't going to be a situation where he's having to play an entire season to gear up to be back to being himself. He is going to hit the ground running. And the last thing that I said on Twitter was, why would you try to draft the next Chris Godwin when you can just have Chris Godwin? He is so important to what this offense is and so important to what they can be that you bring him back with the rise that Jalen McMillan had late in the season, and you have that trio. That's a nightmare for opposing defenses in 2025. I'm going to talk more about Jalen McMillan in just a minute, but beyond that, Cade Otton had a really good year. Career high in receptions with 59, career high in yards with 600, tied his career high in touchdowns with 4, but he did miss 3 games this season, whereas last season he played in all 17 and he got in the end zone just 4 times. Payne Durham with a couple of touchdowns in his absence, so I believe that Cade would have finished with at least 5, maybe 6 or 7 touchdowns at the end of the season. But he became that trusted third down target for Baker once Chris Godwin went down, and that resulted in 31 receptions for a first down this season. His 10.2 yards per reception, also a career high. And then finally, Jalen McMillan, who had such an impressive run at the end of the season. 7 touchdowns in his final 5 games. That was that resulted in him tying Jamar Chase for the most touchdowns in a 5-game stretch in the entire league over the course of the 2024 season. And then J-Mac played in just 13 games this season, finished with 461 yards. Not overly impressive, but what is impressive is when you take a look at the fact that he got 316 of those 461 yards in the final 5 weeks of the regular season. He added 41 more in the playoff loss to the Commanders. So I think J-Mac has a really, really bright future, and he's going to have his breakout next season when he's finally playing at that level for an entire year. We started to see the signs of it down the stretch over the last 5 or 6 weeks, but it took him a little while to get acclimated to the offense before he was really able to take off. Not to mention, he dealt with some injuries and missed some time. A success rate of 55.2%. That's a testament of how big of an impact he had down the stretch. 17 of his final 24 receptions were first downs, which accounted for more than half of his first down receptions the entire season. That late season surge shows that he and Baker had finally developed a trust and a rapport, and that Liam knew that he could dial up plays for number 15 in crucial moments down the final stretch of the season. That's going to continue into next year, regardless of who the offensive coordinator is. If Liam moves on and you have a new offensive coordinator come in, he's going to see what McMillan and Baker were able to do with one another down the stretch, and that's going to be a problem for defenses moving forward. So overall, this was one of the most impressive offenses that the Bucs have had in the last decade in the history of their franchise. And that's certainly saying something considering how dominant the offense was during those first 2 Brady years. Obviously, you can't say much about the last Brady year. That was kind of a dumpster fire. But this is an offense that is going to keep the Bucs competitive for the foreseeable future, whether Liam Cohen stays or goes. That's going to do it for this episode, but please come back tomorrow. We are going to recap the defense. I get the feeling it's not going to be nearly as much fun, but we're going to do it anyway. In the meantime, please make sure you're checking out everything on Twitter at Locked On Bucs, at @JYarcho_Bucs. Become a Locked On Bucs insider. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs or click the link in the show notes. And make sure you are following on YouTube with those notifications turned on, as well as wherever you get your podcasts. Hope you all have an absolutely outstanding day. Stay safe, stay healthy, fire the cannons. I want to thank you so much for joining me right here on Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.